Today I want to do something just a little bit different. Most of the time when we focus on a particular message or topic, it's very specifically focused on a specific area of life or decision making or a mental structure or some kind of framework for your life. But today I want to do something that's a little more overarching, if you would just go there with me for a few moments. But before I dive into that, I want to just give you a little personal update. Some of you guys follow us on social media, and you might know that 2 weeks ago, on Monday, we had just flown in from London, then we flew in from New York, and then we came into LA, and then I spoke here on Sunday, and I knew on Monday I was probably exhausted, but we had a chance to play padel, and I just love sports. And I don't know if you're familiar with padel, but it's that racket sport where there's glass that encases the court, and it's very fast and very dynamic and much more athletic than pickleball, and which is a sport for people who want to not be athletic. And so we're playing padel. We're having an incredible time. I snuck off and played, and there was a whole group of us. We had 2 different courts, an hour and a half was amazing. And it was me and a new friend who was one of the founders of One Oak, and he wasn't very good. And so I was having to, compensate for my partner a little bit. And I was playing against, we were playing against my son Aaron and John Gordon, who's coming to speak this week at the arena. And we were ahead 4 games to 0, so there was no pressure on us. And I was all the way in the back court, and Aaron decides to dink the ball over the net, just to make a very disrespectful statement. And so something inside of me just instinctively reacted, and I thought, I can't let him get this point. This point was meaningless, but something in my head said, you have to show him that nothing is safe for him. And so I started running from that backcourt full speed. I felt like I was running so fast. I have a feeling I wasn't running nearly as fast as I felt, but in my mind, it was like supersonic. And I was running, and then all of a sudden, as I was running, I heard something explode in my right hamstring, and my hamstring popped. And if you ever had a rubber band and you just pulled it back and you just watch it take off, that's the way my body went. So when my hamstring popped, I just went flying forward. And I was on the way to hit the net with my head, and I thought that probably wouldn't be good for me. So I decided to try to stop the momentum of flying forward with my left arm. And the next thing I knew, I was laying there, and when I looked to the left, my arm was going in 2 different directions. And it just completely dislodged my elbow. And it was a very, very, mildly traumatic moment for the people who were there. And my friend John Gordon told me he had nightmares all night, and I'm calling people, trying to help them process their trauma that I've unfortunately created. And so I'm laying on the ground, and I remember looking to the left, and I thought my arm was straight down, and then when I looked and realized it was going that way and that way. And I thought, don't look at it again. It's not good for you. And sometimes you don't want to know. And then they had to bring in an ambulance and rush me off and reset my arm and then go to a few surgeons this week. And frankly, I've been thinking for the last 2 weeks, why? Why did I have to go for that shot? You ever have those moments of self-loathing? Where you're like, why could you just not let it go? In fact, that's the question Aaron's asked me, and the question my wife Kim asks me, like, why? Why do you have to? In fact, in the ambulance driver looked at my son and said, "You seem very calm." And he said, "You don't know my dad." And I said, "I've grown up like this all my life." And I've had this thought, why couldn't I not go for that ball? And I realized that there's a mental structure that I've crafted inside of my own brain that works against me sometimes. But it's the way I do everything in my life. I just don't know not to go for it. And that decision was made years before that moment on the court. That I had made that decision so long before that it was actually an after effect of who I am, not of what the moment I was in. And for many of us, we don't realize that the choices we make in our lives are not shaped in that moment. They're shaped in your character. They're shaped in your mental structures. They're shaped in the choices you've made in your life that have made you who you are. I've actually had quite a few moments trying to process, how can I shape my brain where I don't go for that? Because I'd like to live. And be able to keep playing sports and keep doing stuff. And I don't really know if I can reframe that, because it's not about a choice I make in a moment, it's about a person I've chosen to become. And I wonder in your life right now, what are the things that happen in the moments that actually reveal to you who you've already decided to become? And I begin here because when we started Mosaic, we had some very specific choices we made. And if you're new to Mosaic, or if you're new to this experience of like church community, it might be a little confusing, but if you're old to it, if you come from another church or for another expression of faith, it'll be very, very confusing to you. Because we make choices here that are based on certain frameworks that are not common, to be frank with you. They're not common to Christianity, and they're not common to the church. And today I want to talk about one of those for you. Because this week, on Thursday and Friday, we have a business conference. It's a personal development conference called The Arena. And I have friends coming from around the world, and the speakers are from all kinds of business spaces. They're just very fascinating people, like Brendan Bouchard, who's, I think, listed as the one or two best communicators in the business world. And we have Jay Glazer from Ballers, who I'm just personally real excited to have. And my friend John Gordon, who's written like 40 books and works with top sports agencies, and Jamie Lima, who started IT Cosmetics and sold it for $1.2 billion and after 9 years. And these people are incredibly successful in their particular worlds. And they're very, very different. And a lot of people go, I don't understand why you would do something like that. And I understand why people are confused. And I wanted to help you understand the philosophy behind the decisions I make. And because I get this question all the time from people. I thought you were a pastor. That may be one of the things I see most on social media. But I thought you were a pastor. And it's happened throughout my life. When I started designing clothes, people said, how can you design clothes? We thought you were a pastor. And I didn't know pastors couldn't design clothes. But I learned that very quickly. Or when I was working in film, I thought you were a pastor. Or when I played an assassin in a pilot, I thought you were a pastor. And do you know how many pastors are actually assassins? Or just, when I worked in tech or worked as an entrepreneur, I constantly get this question or the statement, I thought you were a pastor. What people are actually saying is that you're violating our needed view of who you must be. And you will spend your life having to decide whether you will be who other people need you to be or who you were created to become. And it's very, very similar in terms of the role of the church. A lot of people, when they say, we thought you were a pastor, what they mean is that you're supposed to be in this spiritual space, and you're not supposed to be in like the secular space. You're supposed to be in the church, but not in the marketplace. And this does a very unique thing for you. It actually abdicates you, if you're in the marketplace, from being spiritual. And so it looks like it's an expectation on me. You should be spiritual, so you shouldn't be in the marketplace. But what it actually means is I'm in the marketplace, so I should be expected to be spiritual. We've created a false line that separates us. So I am so glad that I decided to start a church among broke people. I mean, you don't look broke because you're so beautiful, you're so handsome, you're so talented, you're so gifted, you have washboard stomachs, you have enough money, for personal development and called Botox and collagen, but you're broke. And I remember we're at the mine, one time we did a financial assessment. We had 1,000 people coming and we had $1,000 in the offering. We said, oh, wow, we're averaging $1 a person. Now, I know people say pastors get rich on church life. I just don't know how they did it. I never figured that out because I targeted people who look like they should be rich, but they're incredibly broke. And so it gave Kim and I a choice we had to make. We had to decide whether we were going to stay and whether we were going to eat. So I had to start companies and I had to start businesses. And because of you, I always had to be an entrepreneur. So I'm really grateful for how broke you have always been. And because we really believed in Mosaic, we had to finance Mosaic because somebody needed to and no one believed in it. And so we committed to finance this place. But if I had been what people thought I should be, we would have never created a place that needed to exist. And I want to take a few minutes and reverse our thinking. A lot of people think that when you're a Christian, that what matters is what happens in the church. But I somehow want to destroy that thinking. Because what happens in the church isn't going to change the world. It's what happens through the church that can change the world. But what happens in the church should transform what happens through the church. But this is not the playing field. This is the locker room. And so if you think this is where the world changes, you're going to go back out into the real world and be changed by it. So I'm very intentional and very focused in what I do here. And I want you to understand this. That when I open up the scriptures, there's a very clear intentionality in my mind. I want to change the way you understand who you are. I want to change the way you think about life, and I want to change the way you think about God. And I want it all to happen in the context of a life-changing relationship that happens with Jesus. But I don't want you to think that what happens in here is the end game for us. Because I'm so grateful that over my lifetime, what I do in here is just a small part of my life. Because what I do out there is actually the measure of my faith, not what I do in here. And I want to show you in the scriptures that this is actually the right framework. I think what happened is when you read the New Testament, Jesus comes, it's pretty dramatic, God stepping into human history. It's hard to overlook. And then, the epic crescendo of the ending, he's crucified, then he's buried, then he's raised on the third day, and that's life-changing. And then the church emerges, and then you have language that comes out of the church of a movement of pastors and teachers and apostles and evangelists, and then we add like bishops and priests, right? And then we have clergy, and so we think then, the movement of Jesus is now harnessed in this it's a small, narrow funnel of what happens in the church, and we actually miss out on how God wants us to permeate every aspect of life in the world. So I want us to look before Jesus to get a better picture of how it should look after Jesus. Because before Jesus, God changes the world. He writes human history through people just like you and me. And they're an intricate part of the real world, if I could just use that language. In Colossians chapter 3, I want to read this one verse to you. Then we're going to look at several people. If you just give me some time this morning. In Colossians chapter 3, verse 23, it says, "Whatever you do, work at it with all of your heart, as working for the Lord, not for human masters." I think this statement is really important because there's a basic assumption here that you have work. Whatever you do, work at it with all of your heart, as working for the Lord. There's a basic assumption that God makes about your life. You have work to do. That you hopefully, from Monday to Saturday, have something that might be described as a job. And that this is where life is very powerfully and uniquely lived out. And this is where you're going to find the tension of whether your faith is real and whether it's vibrant and whether it can actually bring positive change to the world. I think that a lot of us have a negative view of work. I think when we think of paradise, before, Adam and Eve messed up everything, we think, they didn't have to work. That's why it's the garden. That's why it's paradise. They didn't have to work. And I think a lot of us, when we think about heaven, maybe we don't think about heaven that much, but when you think about heaven, what do you think? Do you think a place where you don't have to work anymore? You're sort of like laying around in the clouds, somebody's bringing you grapes and dark chocolate, right? It's just like, and so it's like heaven and paradise are the before and after in between the horrible punishment called work. But the reality is that, and this is going to be bad news for some of you, work is actually God's idea. Work is not a punishment, it's an opportunity, it's a gift. It's a benefit. And so I know where it gets messy, because when Adam and Eve mess up, God says, here are the consequences. And one of the consequences is when you work, it's going to be unsatisfying. You're going to sweat, you're going to toil, you're going to work, and it's not going to have the outcome that you want. So we read that, we go, you see, work is the punishment. No! Work becoming meaningless is the punishment. But when they were in the garden, God gave them a job. You're to actually rule and have authority over all creation. That's a huge job. That's a C-suite job. You're the CEO. You're running the universe. That's a job. They didn't just get up in the morning, enjoy being naked, sipping lemonade, sitting by the Euphrates. They actually had work to do, and it was fun. It was meaningful. It was rich. It was deep. It was profound. And that's the way I think about, by the way, heaven. If there's no work in heaven, to me, that's hell. If you're just sitting, can you imagine just sitting around doing nothing for all of eternity? You would go out of your mind. You go, God, really? Like, just moving cloud to cloud, laying around is not that exciting. I actually think that in eternity, we get our biggest assignments. That if we think that we're taking on big, gigantic, incredible tasks and responsibilities now, you should wait to see what you're going to be entrusted with in eternity. Because work is not a punishment, it is a gift. Because it means God created you with intention and purpose. I wonder how many of us think that we're supposed to have like our spiritual life and then there's work. Some of you are going to get up tomorrow and go, back to work. You're going to act like you hate your job, you hate your life, you hate your boss, you hate everything. And then you're wondering why you're miserable. And it's not the first time you've hated your job. You hated the last job too and the job before that. And you've always had an incompetent boss. Have you ever noticed that? It's amazing how many people I talk to whose boss is absolutely incompetent. But why is it that you keep getting hired by incompetent people? So you should ask that question if you think your boss is incompetent. It's because we have a wrong view of life. I was just on a phone call with someone, I can't even remember who, because the last 2 weeks have been a little blurry for me. I don't remember everything. Not because of painkillers. And I've chosen not to do the painkillers, but my brain is still a little jarbled up. And after I finished this phone call, the person just blurted out a line. He said, everything happens for a reason. And when he said it, I thought, just let it go. You're in pain. Just get off the phone. He said, everything happens for a reason. And I said, oh, he didn't mean to. He doesn't mean to say a stupid cliche that is meaningless and empty. He thinks it's meaningful. He's trying to be profound. He's repeating what he's heard. Don't blame him for that level of stupidity. And you ever have those thoughts? No? And I wanted to let it go. But that's why I have to go after the ball. Because there's something in my head that says you can't let it go. So when he said everything happens for a reason, and I said everything happens and you have to bring it reason. And he goes, oh yeah, that's true. Click. See, we are told everything happens for a reason, but really everything doesn't have meaning behind it. You have to bring meaning to things. And the problem with life sometimes is it's just unreasonable. It'd be easy for me to go, oh, I'm laying here on the ground and my arm's going to a direction, but everything happens for a reason. Yeah, the reason I was so stupid, I went for a ball I couldn't get to. I mean, if you really want to break it down, so much of our lives are just based on stupidity. But the reality is that we are given this opportunity to engage life fully, and it's our job to bring meaning to life. It's our job to bring reason to life. It is our job to bring intention to life. And if you keep looking for it out there, you're never going to find it. And so he tells us, whatever you do, work at it with all of your heart. So I don't know what you're doing right now, but I have a feeling that whatever you're doing right now, how many of you are in a temporary job waiting for the job you really want? Come on, be honest. Yeah, a lot more. Because, see, a lot of us are not in the job we want, we're just in the job we have, right? But the problem is that you will never be ready for the job you want if you don't do the job you have as if it's the job you want. And so we keep waiting for the job we want. We keep wondering why no one's ever inviting us or offering us the job we really want. But we're not doing the job we don't want as if it's the job we want. And people watch us and go, I don't want that person because they don't want to do that job and they won't want to do the job that I want them to do. You following me? You have to do every job like it's the job you want. You have to do every job as if you're working for God, not for your boss. Now, don't act like your boss is God. He might think he should be God. But you should work for something higher, more noble than just your employer. But when you wake up in the morning and you go to work, and I don't care what your role is, I don't care how insignificant you may feel your job is, when you bring significance to that job, there's something happening inside of you you're completely unaware of. It is preparing you for a bigger future. But that's the way I want you to engage life, and I want you to realize the life that needs to be engaged. Do you realize that the most important people in the Bible were never pastors or rabbis? They were business people. They were just people in the hard space of life and doing it in such a way that they just kept getting promoted and getting promoted and getting promoted. And I want you to see a few of these with me, but I also want you to see something else. They had nothing leveraged toward their advantage. I think it's so funny. I mean, here we are in the middle of an election season, and people get all, nervous about, where our country's going and who's going to destroy it. And it doesn't matter. Whichever side you're on, the other side's going to destroy it. It's all going to go bad. And there's some people actually think that if you love God, if you're a follower of Jesus, the country should be affirming of that. And the truth is, our faith always works better when everyone's against us. We don't really do that well when everything is leveraged for us. We get soft. I want you to see at least 4 people, but there's more, who God raised up in the most secular environments. First one is Joseph, Genesis 41. I'm just going to the end of the stories, by the way. You have to go and read it yourself if you want the whole story. In Genesis 41, it says this. So Pharaoh was the ruler of Egypt, who worshiped false gods, Egyptian gods. So Pharaoh said to Joseph, I hereby put you in charge of the whole land of Egypt. This is how the story ends. Then Pharaoh took his signet ring from his finger and put it on Joseph's finger. He dressed him in robes and fine linens and put a gold chain around his neck. Talk about bling, way before bling was bling. Joseph walking around, and he also had a multicolored raincoat, so he was very interesting. And so he's walking his bling, but he's not going to Diddy's parties. He's like still looking pretty fine, looking pretty cool, and it's not the medication, okay? And it says, and then the Pharaoh had him ride in a chariot as his second in command, and people shouted for him, "Make way!" I mean, he's feeling himself. Thus, he put him in charge of the whole land of Egypt. And then Pharaoh said to Joseph, I am Pharaoh, but without your word, no one will lift a hand or foot in all of Egypt. Now, if you don't know the beginning of the story, Joseph was really eccentric and kind of, dreamy, and his brothers hated him, and they were going to kill him. Then they sold him to slavery. Then he went to prison for crimes he did not commit, and prisons again for crimes he didn't commit. Because life was just a tragedy. He spends years and years and years of his life in captivity, in slavery, and then he just happens to have an opportunity, and he serves the Pharaoh, and he's elevated to where his story ends, where he becomes the second most powerful person in the empire of Egypt. This, by the way, is not an anomaly. It is actually the consistent pattern of how God works. He takes someone out of obscurity and moves them to a position of such influence that the entire future of that nation is dependent on their decisions. But I'm just going to keep moving. Exodus 3, verses 7 through 12. Not just Joseph, Moses. Moses' story is a little bit different, but we're coming to this part of it. The Lord said to Moses, I have indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt. I've heard them crying out because of their slave drivers. I am concerned about their suffering. So I have come down to rescue them from the hands of the Egyptians and to bring them out of that land into a good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey. He goes on to say, and now the cry of the Israelites has reached me, and I have seen the way the Egyptians are oppressing them. So now go. I am sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. But Moses said to God, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt? And God said, I will be with you, and this will be the sign to you that I have sent you. When you have brought them out of the land of Egypt, you will worship God on this mountain. So God hears Israel crying out, suffering in captivity. By the way, the Bible's a story of slaves, not of free men. And God says, I have heard the cries and I'm going to deliver them. So Moses, I'm sending you down there. And God did not send him to be a rabbi. Now, if he were a rabbi, it would have been a beautiful thing. But he did not send him to be a rabbi. He didn't say, Moses, I want you to go down there and I want you to hear their stories. Moses, I want you to go and I want you to hear their confessions. Moses, I want you to go down there. I want you to empathize with their pain and sorrow and suffering. And then come to me and tell me what you hear. He says, Moses, I'm sending you down there to deliver them. Moses was George Washington, fighting against a large oppressive nation and delivered his people and established a new nation. Just like Joseph became the economist that led an entire nation to freedom, Moses became the deliverer that created a brand new nation. Oh, but that's not an exception. In Daniel chapter 2, verses 46 through 49, now you have Daniel, another character that you know about in the Bible. And for some reason, whenever we hear the names Joseph and Moses and Daniel, somehow we think these are people who are somehow inside of, weirdly enough, the church, inside of Israel, but they're not. Their entire lives are engaged with the outside world that did not believe in God. Daniel, then King Nebuchadnezzar, fell prostrate before Daniel and paid him honor in order that an offering and incense be presented to him. This is Nebuchadnezzar, the Babylonian king. Now, you may not know much about history, but even Hollywood knows Babylon is bad. And Nebuchadnezzar is the leader of Babylon, and he says that he is God. He believes there are many gods, but he is God. He wants to be worshiped, and Daniel would refuse to worship him. Now he's giving Daniel honor. The king says to Daniel, surely your God, because he doesn't know him. He's not saying my God. He says, surely your God is the God of gods and the Lord of kings and a revealer of mysteries. For you were able to reveal this mystery. Then the king placed Daniel in a high position and lavished him with many gifts. He made him ruler over the entire province of Babylon and placed him in charge of all its wise men. Moreover, at Daniel's request, the king appointed Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego administrators over the province of Babylon, while Daniel himself remained on the royal court. Here you have one of the most pagan, decadent, destructive, evil empires in human history, the Babylonians, and God raises up Daniel through Nebuchadnezzar. But Daniel begins as a captive. The Babylonians came and captured the Israelites. They oppressed them. They made them slaves. There was no advantage for Daniel in his life. And yet, God raised him up and made him the most powerful voice, where the king who thought he was a god knew that Daniel and his God were more powerful than him. You think you have problems at work. But it doesn't end there. You have Esther. Don't want to leave the ladies out. You have Esther. I mean, I was trying to figure out what would be the equivalent to Esther. I mean, I think Esther is strangely enough, like a Kardashian, or or Marilyn Monroe, because Esther is taken as a slave. She's made a concubine. She's seen as property. And she only stands out because she's beautiful. Don't underestimate. Use what you got. And it says, when the king's order and edict had been proclaimed in Esther chapter 2, verse 8, many young women were brought to the citadel of Susa and put in the care of Haggai. Esther also was taken to the king's palace and entrusted to Haggai, who had charge of the harem. She was in a harem. She pleased him and won his favor. Immediately, he provided her with beauty treatments and special foods. So she's spawing all day and, doing Botox and, and fillers and just doing her thing. And then he assigned to her 7 female attendants selected from the king's palace and moved her into her attendance into the best place in the harem. Now, the king was attracted to Esther more than to any of the other women, and she won his favor and approved more than all the other virgins. So he set a royal crown on her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. And later, because Esther becomes queen, when Xerxes, and by the way, Xerxes is the king of Persia when Esther was alive. If you know who Xerxes is, go watch 300. It's a historical documentary, and it will terrify you. Because she was a slave to a brutally evil ruler who consumed women like other people consume food. But he saw Esther, and at first he's attracted to her beauty, but then he's mesmerized by her intelligence and her wisdom and her character. And then she has an opportunity because he's going to kill all the Jews. And Mordecai comes to her and says, if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place, but you and your father's house will perish. And who knows but you have come to this royal position for such a time as this. See, this is the insight that the scriptures want us to have about life. Your life is not an accident. And where you are and where you work, that's your arena. And every day when you enter the arena, if you walk in with a mindset that God has placed you in that place for a time like this, so that you can be the person who needs to be there, who maybe brings that voice that would remain silent without you. And you see this pattern throughout all these people. When there was obscurity, what God was doing is he was taking them through a process of developing their character. And with every one of them, with Joseph and with Daniel, with Moses, with Esther, by the way, with David and Joshua and Deborah, every one of them has a journey where the first phase, they look as if their life will never amount to anything because all God is working on is their character. And God is taking them through a journey of preparation, preparing them for that moment where they will have an opportunity to shine. And some of you, you're not clear on what's happening in your life. You're God, why aren't you showing up? God, why aren't you elevating me? God, why aren't you opening up the doors? God, why aren't you making a way for me? And what you need to hear is God saying, I'm taking you through a process. I'm shaping your character so that you can actually face the gauntlet that's coming. I'm actually taking you through a process of preparation so that you will have the skills and disciplines and competencies necessary to rise to the top. And when God develops our character and he takes us to the journey of preparation, then he brings a crisis. And that crisis becomes the filter through which God divides between the men and the boys, the women and the girls. God divides between the heroes and the victims. Because in the crisis, it's amazing how many people have positions, how many people have titles, how many people have looked so courageous, how many people have looked so confident, but in the crisis, they just go filtered out and drifting away. And it's in the crisis that God is preparing you to shine. And then when you come to that crisis, what people discover are the competencies that God has been building in you from day one. The person you've become by the choices you've made long before the moment. And when you develop those competencies, oh, by the way, I think this is where a lot of us make a mistake. We think, God, give me the opportunity. I'll get ready for it. If you're not ready for the opportunity, it will not look like an opportunity. It'll look like an obligation. When you're not ready for the opportunity, it looks like oppression. When you're not ready for the opportunity, it feels like stress and anxiety. It feels like God's being unfair. It feels like life is too hard. When you're not ready for the opportunity, you will become a victim. But if you will take every day of your life and say, God, today is my day of preparation because I don't know what you need from me tomorrow. I cannot picture, I cannot imagine who you will need me to be. So God, today I'm going to be the best at whatever you put in front of me. I will establish a life of discipline way beyond what's necessary to succeed in this. God, I'm going to develop an internal integrity, not what other people demand of me, but what I demand of myself. If you'll take this moment in your life and prepare yourself by choosing to bring your best every day, I'm telling you, when the crisis comes, you will shine. When the crisis comes, you will elevate. Most of us, we want our lives to get better. We have some area in our life we want to destroy a ceiling or erase a limitation. Now, I don't know if I could be any clearer. Every ceiling in your life, every limitation in your life, every circumstance that you believe is limiting who you are is an illusion. Every limitation in your life is internal and not external. And if you will change the internal construction of who you are, you will be ready for bigger moments. And when everyone else sees a crisis, you're going to see an opportunity. And when everyone starts falling away, you're going to start stepping up. When everyone else goes running away, you're going to start running into the fire because you have been waiting all your life for this moment. And frankly, a huge part of why I went so publicly involved in the secular personal development space is I got tired of watching Christians look to Jesus for their faith and then look to everyone else in the market for their life. There is no one who understands how your life should be constructed better than Jesus. And no book that can give you the keys to living the life you're created to live like the scriptures. But I want you to know, here at Mosaic, our commitment is to prepare you for the arena, to not pretend this is the arena. This is the training ground. This is where we throw the sawdust and we learn how to use a sword. This is where we learn how to fight the fight. Because when you step out of this place, that real life, that place that you call work, that's the arena. And that is the space that we want to prepare you to be the best version of yourself, the optimal expression of who you are. Because God isn't trying to get you through this life. He's trying to get life through you in this life. And if you're here right now and you've never entrusted Jesus with your life, if you've never crossed the line of faith, I want to be so clear. Jesus did not die just so that you could live after you die. Jesus died so that you could live before you die. Jesus died on the cross and rose from the dead so that you could live the life God created you to live. That's his invitation. That is not only his promise, it is your opportunity. You ready for the arena? It's waiting for you. You have to decide. How will I stand in the arena of life? Will I be ready for that moment where God needs me most? And the world desperately needs you. Would you bow your heads with me just for a moment? Close your eyes. Some of you need to change your mind about work, about life, about God. You need to step out of this place ready for the arena, ready for the challenges, turning them into opportunities. But there are some of you here and you've never entrusted Jesus with your life. You've never crossed the line of faith. You've never said, Jesus, I give my life to you, and mean it. And if you're here and you're just done surviving, you're done existing, you are ready to live the life that God created you to live, and you're ready to trust Jesus with your life, I want to invite you right now. Just whisper this simple prayer, Jesus, I give you my life. Right now, just tell him, Jesus, I give you my life. Right now, just tell him. This is where it begins. God wants to put his life in you. He wants to infuse courage into your soul, faith into your soul, love into your soul, life into your soul. And the moment you give your life to him, he puts his life in you. Are you ready? Right now, just whisper that prayer, Jesus, I give you my life. Jesus, I give you my life. If this is your prayer, I want to pray for you. If you just whispered that prayer, Jesus, I give you my life, I want you with all the courage you have just to raise your hand up quickly and high. Right now, Jesus, I give you my life. Right now, just hold it up high. Don't hesitate. This is your moment. This is for you. Jesus, I give you my life. Beautiful. Father, I thank you for each person who in this moment has opened up their life to you. I thank you for the courage it takes to acknowledge their need for you. And God, I pray that in this moment they would know that everything has changed, that they belong to you, that you dwell within them, that they never have to do life alone again, that today is the beginning of a new future, of a new life, of a new them. We thank you, Jesus. We pray in your name. Amen and amen. Let's just thank God for all those who have responded to him. So good. Man, I'm just so excited. You know, the one thing I realized that I can't do is I can't clap. And so I thank you for clapping on my behalf and just celebrating all of you who've opened up your life to him. I just want to just leave you with this last encouragement. This Friday and Saturday, a lot of our friends are coming from around the world, around the country, to invest in you, invest in this community. And if you haven't yet registered for the arena, if you are in the business space, if you know that that's your calling, that's your space, I would encourage you to come. Every problem you want solved in your life begins with an eternal solution. And they're coming from all these different disciplines to pour their insight, their wisdom, their knowledge, their teaching, their experience into your life. Don't miss this opportunity. The arena is here for you. Hey, I love you guys. God bless.